Uganda has protested Kenya's delay in abolishing a 7% levy on milk imports following recent bilateral talks meant to resolve the stalemate. In a letter dated July 19th, Ugandan Agricultural Minister Frank Twomwabazi asked Kenya and Tanzania to allow Ugandan milk into their markets after a flawed soft diplomacy strategy. Trade Minister Betty Maina and her Ugandan counterpart had in April agreed to abolish the trade barriers that have led to a sour relationship between the two countries since late 2019. Gospel Obele, who's an economist, joins me now to discuss further. Gospel, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Starting with Kenya and the farming situation, looking at the growth in outstanding Greek loans, 16% to 23.7. Is there any reason to be surprised that Kenya's Greek sector has suffered from these defaults?
I don't think there is any need to be surprised, particularly. And that also speaks to the fact that it's consistent in most African markets that there are no strong economic structures, all right, that would act as shock absorbers in a sense and all that. So, yeah, the pandemic hit, value chains were disrupted, trade activities were affected, and off-taker markets were affected as well. So it was only expected that in the short term or in the short run, we began to see the effects in farmers being able to meet their financial related obligations.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's take a look at another image here. Kenya's agri sector has a higher non-performing loan ratio than building and construction and also trade. Well, I guess what makes these sectors so vulnerable to, default and the pandemic?
All right, so when we talk about the agricultural sector, we talk about many other things, inclusive of food in the sense, all right? And generally, agricultural sectors are to a large extent more vulnerable when you look at them across the value chains and the various value chain activities that tie up to making that sector productive in a sense. The sector also positions itself as an input sector for many other sectors, many other economic sectors in different markets. All right, so yeah, the sector is generally weak in terms of its value chain activities and as much more vulnerable to shocks and all that when you look at it from the wider perspective.
Thanks. When you think about the amount of land in Africa and the push for governments towards farming as a source of employment, can stats like this shift policy elsewhere?
Well, technically, there are different parts to that argument and to the conversation in the sense. The argument for land and all of that has been rising for a long time, but I think that the focus should be around the productive end of the value chain, that's agro-processing, and ensuring that the sector in the Kenya market is properly positioned for more productivity and more value exchange vis-a-vis for exports in other regions and into the global community. So I would say that the stats are not enough for us to look elsewhere, but I think it's a call for us to deepen our own homegrown engagements, especially within the Kenyan economy right now, and to unlock for more productive use of the sector, as well as also thinking about how that sector can play with other sectors or connect to other sectors and play its functional role, all right, in unlocking the productive chains for other sectors as an input sector in itself.
Great stuff. Okay, still in Kenya, but on the subject of defaults, let's move from agriculture to real estate. What do you make of landlords possibly being barred from auctioning the property of rent defaulters without court approval if Parliament gets its way?
Yeah, on a surface level, I think it makes sense because then again, it's more or less like a caution in the sense to let landlords know that at the end of the day, the states can still put some level of controls on how these things play out, because nobody saw the pandemic coming. All right, income disposables have shrinked, market activities are on the low and struggling in the sense to recover, especially in Kenya. All right, so it would not make any technical sense for landlords to take that power and then do anything that they want to do with it in a sense. So yeah, it makes sense for there to be one or two controls, all right, to manage dynamics around landlord-tenant relationships and to rethink repayments and engagements going forward to protect livelihood and all of that. Because the economic effects at the end of the day are adverse, all right, if landlords choose to engage the way they want to in this case.
All right, great. So along that line of thought, what other option does a landlord have at their disposal when a tenant defaults on their rent? I mean, how else are they supposed to recoup their losses?
I think leveraging taking a cue from a CBN model where loan repayments and loan structures were revisited during the pandemic and all that will be just fine in the short term. That means landlord may need to openly seek to have conversations with the tenants and have a solid plan on ground for the tenants to repay their rents in the sense. All right. I think in that way we'll get to have a more of a win-win situation than just putting the economy or livelihoods of people in chaotic situations.
Thanks. And I need to touch on Nigeria for a moment since we're talking about rent, defaults, and so on. What's the impact, in your view, on disposable income, paying rent annually versus monthly as it's done here in Nigeria?
Well, technically, the average Nigerian is getting poorer on a month-to-month basis. The middle class is also shrinking in their huge numbers, and the quality of the naira has also dropped. But then again, to a large extent, in many cases in Nigeria, you have rent being paid annually. So that amount is still fixed, all right, whichever way you want to look at it and whichever way things play out in the economy. So I think it largely boils down to the individual, all right, to engage more prudent financial management practices to ensure that he or she saves better and can plan better, probably look for other streams of income to ensure they meet their yearly remittance and all of that in that space. So it's more around critical planning and rethinking newer ways to engage market redistribution, talent management, and all of that to unlock new opportunities for themselves as tenants or as people who hold lease opportunities within this space in the real estate sector.
Thanks for that. All right, back to agriculture, but this time the spat between Uganda, Kenya, the whole milk levy situation. I guess what's the rationale for Kenya to be imposing levies on milk coming in from Uganda, basically milk imports?
All right, so there are different sides to this conversation, and what we say is just a long-heated battle with both countries and trade tensions around that subsector in the sense, dairy products. We see that there are issues around imports, all right, and Kenya currently is trying to engage strategies to protect local farmers. There are leakages in the economy when it comes to milk imports, especially from the Ugandan market. So, and then the COVID-19 third wave is also on the move as it hits the Ugandan market and all that. So the levy was sort of like a protectionist strategy, trade protection strategy between the two countries to protect local farmers as well as to ensure safety of products coming into the country. However, it borders heavy, it creates concerns around the AFCFTA agreement and shows the level of poor regional alignment, all right, and ability to work together as an Eastern African continent, as a region, all right, vis-a-vis the larger African continent.
So do you think that the matter can be resolved amicably between the two of them?
I think it can be resolved, but then again, the harder issues have to be discussed around leakages, around smuggling, around how do we also achieve trade agreements whilst protecting local farmers and what's currently happening at the base, all right? And aside just the argument between Uganda and Kenya, it's a bigger question. Many markets in the African economy will need to answer many questions. The other African markets will need to answer within the purview of the AFCFTA. How do we protect our homegrown businesses whilst opening the doors for other businesses and other products and services to come into the economy, all right, in the name of trade relations and all of that. So I think it can be resolved, but it's going to be a hard call, and tougher issues may have to be discussed, as well as internal structures and processes or institutional capacity will have to be strengthened, all right, to manage those two dynamics right there. By the end of the day, I think there's a possibility around that.
Okay, great stuff. And I think you've already mentioned the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I guess, are these the kind of issues that is meant to resolve going forward? Briefly, if you can.
I don't think the AFCA is really positioned to resolve those kind of issues in the sense. Countries will have to own up to the fact that there are realities that the trade agreement will have to deal with. All right, in terms of how do we protect our home whilst still opening our doors. Now, the problem with that is that not every African country is economically viable or commercially viable, all right, to engage that technicality in the dynamic. So that technicality in the sense, all right. So for countries who have a low productive base, they will be at the receiving end and probably become more like a capital flight base for other countries that have a stronger productive strength in the sense. So the agreement simply allows us to do business, all right, at a more friendlier level, but it doesn't speak to the fact that there are stronger context issues and contextual dynamics that need to be considered or put in place for trade relations to really happen within the short and long term for the continent.
Great stuff. Gospel Obele. Gospel, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much. Gospel Obele, Economist, thanks for taking us through
Thank you for having me as always.
the matters in the Eastern African region. All right.